members. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our presenter for today's training, Norma Jean Mattei, PhD, PE. Norma Jean is a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of New Orleans. She now serves as the senior civilian member and one of two civilian civil engineer commissioners on the Mississippi River Commission. Dr. Mattei has served as the 2017 president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, coming into that position 2 years after me. And she chaired that organization board of direction for that year. She, her husband, two engineer daughters, an engineer son-in-law, lots of engineers in the family, all reside in New Orleans. And now, Norma Jean, please make your presentation.
Thank you, Bob. So this should give you an hour of engineering ethics toward your license requirements if you are licensed in a jurisdiction that requires continuing education, and if one of those education hours has got to be in ethics. So I do these presentations quite a bit, and this is the first time I'm doing this particular topic. I always start with either covering the code of ethics for a professional society, a code of ethics for an SPE, or the code of ethics for a particular jurisdiction, in this case, Texas. And because ASCE had recently made some changes to their code of ethics, I thought this is an ASCE Texas section virtual luncheon. Let's talk about ASCE's code of ethics. And now my machine has just, there we go. It had frozen up a little bit, so sorry about that. So as I mentioned, we recently reformatted our code of ethics in October of last year. It was a lot of work for a whole committee of dedicated volunteers gathering a lot of information on ethics, engineering ethics for, in particular, civil engineers, and how we should perhaps reshape the format of our code of ethics so that we can move more seamlessly into the future. So let's talk a little bit about that. So it's a little bit different. Our code of ethics had been more bullet points, and perhaps, to be honest with you, a little bit easier for me to parse words and make short presentations. But when you are personally having an ethical issue to wrestle with, you want to have a real good tool to use that you can then, that will give you guidance. And one of the differences between how the code is formatted now and our prior code is that there's a more intentional measuring and stacking of priorities of what's within the code of ethics. And so I think that it is easier for someone who is, and if you're struggling with an ethical issue, you're in a tough spot, and you're looking for something to help you in dealing with this to the best of your ability. And we're trained to look at technical issues in a very methodological way, and we can use that same technique in dealing with an ethical issue. And having a code that gives you some type of a prioritization of the different parts really is helpful in that instance. So the beginning of ASCE's Code of Ethics is the preamble. And at the very top, it talks about how ASCE members must conduct themselves with integrity and professionalism, and above all else, protect and advance, and I have that in red, that's an addition, to health, safety, and welfare of the public. So these words you would find in our old code, but it's the preamble, and we've added, not only should we as civil engineers and members of ASCE protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, we should in our work attempt to advance the health, the safety, and the welfare of the public. So number one, fundamental principles, members create safe, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure. So that's number one in our principles. Number two, members treat all persons with respect, dignity, and fairness in a manner that fosters equitable and participation in ASCE without regard to personal identity. So the third fundamental principle is about how we as members should consider anticipated as well as just the current needs of society. Our fourth principle, as a member of ASCE, we should utilize our knowledge and our skills to enhance the quality of life for humanity. And in order of priority, when you're looking at these fundamental principles, the parts pertaining to society has the highest priority. The second in priority is what would be really connected to our natural and built environment. The third in priority is impact to the profession. So these fundamental principles, how that impacts the profession. The fourth is clients and employers, and the fifth is our peers. So this is the pecking order. So most important and of utmost priority is within our fundamental principles, we should be guided by what impacts society, with the others following in that prioritized order. So let's look a little bit more into society and within the fundamental principles of ASCE's Code of Ethics. So again, highlighted, protect the health and safety and welfare of the public. Also, enhance the quality of life for humanity. Express your opinions truthfully. Zero tolerance for bribery, fraud, and corruption. So these all were parts of our older code. Now it's just a different format. So you'll see treat all persons with respect, dignity, and fairness. So that was in our old format, the newer or newest of the 8. So here it falls within our fundamental principles under society. Endeavor to be of service in civic affairs. You may have not have seen that in our older code. So look into civic affairs and how you can serve there. Consider historical, social, cultural needs of the community. Consider whether there are limitations, or consider your capabilities, and also the implications of using both current and emerging technologies. So emerging technologies, you might not have a full understanding of its capabilities, its limitations, and the implications of use of that emerging technology. So move forward, but move forward carefully and with caution. And report misconduct to appropriate authorities to protect the public. So our number 2 priority, that's the natural and built environment. So here, adhere to the principles of sustainable development. So I know that a Texan that you're familiar with, Wayne Klotz, does engineering ethics presentations, and often he'll talk about sustainability and how, as civil engineers, in order to adhere ethically as members, we should be striving to use the principles of sustainability in our day-to-day work. And so he'd always ask the question, do you do that in your day-to-day work? And so I think that, again, here it is. We should adhere to the principles of sustainable development. So the triple bottom line. So not just all about the economic impact not all about the environmental impact. And here it is, priority number 2, the natural and built environment, but also looking into the equitable or social aspects of whatever project you're working in order to have a project that truly is sustainable. So here, consider and balance the social, the environmental, and economic impacts. Look at opportunities to improve within your project. Mitigate any adverse effects. And in purple, I highlighted use resources wisely. So don't not consider the resources that you're using in your day-to-day practice, but try to minimize the depletion of those resources. And this one, the reason why I have these in purple, and I missed development in the first line, is that we'll be talking a little bit further after we complete this section on ASCE's Code of Ethics on how we as engineers can't design and fabricate or manufacture products that have unlimited life, because it's just not economically feasible. So how do we minimize resource depletion when we do make those decisions based on the life of a given piece of infrastructure, or if you're in an engineering area where you're developing products, how do you continue developing products, selling products that are have new and improved features, but minimizing the depletion of resources, because then your older products are no longer quite as useful. The profession number 4 under fundamental number 3, pardon me, under fundamental principles, it's number 3 in priority. Uphold the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession. Of course, practice engineering and comply to all legal requirements within your jurisdiction of practice. Represent your professional qualifications and experiences truthfully. That's all about being competent in the area in which you do practice. Don't practice unfair competition. Mentor, and this is very important when you're managing younger engineers, to think about how you can best mentor them, because remember, they get out with their undergraduate degree and they're not able to become PEs until they've had that experiential component of their practice. And so if you are a PE who is managing a intern or interns, regard that mentorship of those interns as an important aspect of your practice, of the job that you're doing. Education, not just of your interns and of your other employees and those that you manage, but educate the public. I spent the morning actually presenting at a Delta Regional Authority Leadership Institute. And so not only one in that room was an engineer, a civil engineer. The rest of the folks were either newly elected mayors or getting involved on a leadership level with chambers of commerce, or they're working for the governor's office in the delta of the Mississippi River, so 8 states in the lower area of the Mississippi River. And very interesting group. And I talked about infrastructure. And they, not only are we as engineers stewards of the built environment and of the infrastructure that enhances the quality of life for society, but those folks that are going to be playing the part of making the decisions if they don't have a technical background, it's interesting to see their perspectives. And so I got some very good feedback. I think that they really enjoyed the presentation because not very many of them were technical in background. After the presentation, they came up and thanked me. So educate the public on the role of civil engineer in society and how, if you're talking to decision makers, you can be an aid. You can actually help them make better decisions. And finally, continue professional development. I'm preaching to the choir because y'all are all here getting your at least your continuing ed ethics hour right now. Oh, I want to go backwards though, because technical and non-technical. So not just ethics, but think about your personal strengths and weaknesses. And often, especially when I teach my undergraduate engineering students, you know, they really, they think, oh, technical writing, I really don't need that. And I'm thinking, well, yes, you really do. And not only do you really need that, but you're going to have to be a good communicator within a long career. And so as an engineering educator, we in engineering education include things such as the capstone course where they work in teams and they make presentations. And I hope if you are asked to perhaps be part of the audience of a university that you live and work close to, take the time and sit in the audience of a capstone presentation. They usually do a great job. They're really interested in getting feedback, not from us people that are in the ivory tower, but from practitioners that talk the talk, walk the walk, and actually practice day to day, because that's where most of our product, the engineering educators product, the new graduates, that's where they're going to be. Not many of them become engineering educators themselves. But most of them getting out with a degree, at least initially, practice engineering. They may go on to law school, they may go on to I have people go open up their own restaurants sometimes, but for the most part, they're going to be practitioners. And they need to understand that they not only need to be technically competent, but have other non-technical, but very important competencies such as communication skills. So number 4 priority, clients and employers. So this is lifted off of our old code, almost verbatim: act as faithful agents of their clients and employers, and act with integrity and professionalism. Let clients and employers know of any real, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest do crop up. If there is a conflict, it does not mean that you cannot proceed because of the conflict, but it means that everyone has to move forward with their eyes wide open. And sometimes it does mean don't proceed. But definitely let your client or employer know of any potential perceived conflicts of interest. Tell them about any risks and limitations involved in your work. And if you're unfortunately overruled, if it is an overruling that impacts health, safety, and welfare of the public, definitely let them let your client, usually it's the client, let them know of the consequences, the potential consequences. Keep anything that's proprietary confidential. That can be a real challenge when you leave an employer for another employer. The best thing, if you're an employer and you've got IP issues or IP that you really want to hold on to, When you hire, write a good contract. Let people know what you expect. If you are a long-term employee that is leaving one position for another, and in your head is information, talk to folks. You do not want to end up in court because of a communication issue. And approve, sign, or seal work products that either you or someone you have been over, or something that you have reviewed. So number 5, the last priority under fundamental principles. So this is all about how we treat each other. So don't take credit for someone else's work. So please, if a high-level person gives you praise and your team was truly the team did the work, please give attribution to that team. Foster health and safety in the workplace. Don't have unsafe practices in your own workplace that you wouldn't design for a client. Promote and exhibit inclusive, equitable, and ethical behavior in all engagements with your colleagues. Be honest and fair when you collaborate. Encourage and enable the education of other engineers, and be a equitable and respectful supervisor. Comment only on professional work. So professional reputation and professional character, not don't get personal in a professional setting. And finally, report violations of the Code of Ethics to ASCE, and where appropriate to the jurisdiction that it is a problem in. So that leads us into the section of this presentation where I'm going to talk about obsolescence in ethics. And it may be for a bunch of civil engineers seem that I'm talking about something that really doesn't have anything to do with civil engineering. And we'll talk a little bit about that toward the tail end. I give these presentations, this is going to be the topic of the year, and I give them to IEEE chapters, ASME folks, the general public. And actually, this was something that I had originally planned to give to an IEEE section. And I thought that it was appropriate for any engineering society, or actually the general public, the more that I looked into it. And there is a difference between obsolescence versus planned obsolescence. So if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, obsolescence is just the process of something becoming obsolete, or in other words, it's outdated so that it's no longer as used or as useful. And we've all had things that have become obsolete, and we'll talk about some examples later. There they are. So thank God the bustle has gone the way of the mammoth. I can't imagine having to wear that. The Model T, absolutely not that many, not as far as safety features, but easy to work on, no computer chips to make it obsolete, but it's obsolete. The good old cathode ray tube TV, a rotary dial telephone, that's red. And I didn't crop this picture. I wanted the typewriter to be in it, but it had an old telephone, even older than this one, the plastic. This is heavier. You couldn't kill these things right here. And look behind here, books. So are they obsolete? I tend to like to go to libraries, and I actually do. I rarely buy books now. I do sometimes, but I do borrow them. I like the feel of them. But it is very nice to be able to carry electronic books, a whole library of books in just a small tablet form. And then film, remember that? Mm. You didn't even know if you got a good picture. You had to get it developed. And then the event was over if you didn't get good photos when we had to deal with photos from film. Oh, there you go. Not only is it things, but it's different occupations. So look, a telephone operator. You don't see that anymore. And an elevator operator. Some occupations have become obsolete, and we surely don't want civil engineering to be a obsolete profession. Oh, games, Pong, and the way that we save our electronic media, a truly floppy disk. So to the smaller hard floppy disk that we still call floppy disks, to the flash drive, to the cloud. So that's obsolescence. When we put the word planned in front of obsolescence, what does that change? So this is creating a product that has its time stamp of expiration. It's much more intentional. So it's a policy of producing goods that become obsolete pretty quick. And so you have to replace them. And because the consumer has got to replace them because you're either designing different, better functions, or you're not supplying the parts that are needed to keep an older model in good working order, so that the older model, when it needs repair, can no longer be repaired, or if you just simply choose to use materials that are not durable, making that good obsolete more quickly. So it's being much more intentional. Now, we as engineers know that you can build something that lasts a long, long time, but sometimes those needs that the public or the user or the consumer had back in the beginning of the design process, at the end of that, say, long-lived good or piece of infrastructure, the needs of the consumer of society has changed and technology has advanced and innovations have occurred. So just where is that line of obsolescence on one side and planned obsolescence on the other side? It's a little murky, but in some instances, it's just not that murky. And we'll talk a little bit about them. So I've got a lot of shoes that I never had a problem with adhesives failing, or with it, if it was a leather sole, it might have gotten worn. That's a wearing situation because they were my favorite shoes. But to have a shoe look beautiful on the top because the leather is still in great shape and the adhesive for the sole giving out, or in some cases, I've been wearing a closed foam cell sole that starts disintegrating while I'm walking. I'm having chunks of my sole I'm leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. It's not bread. Just how long are these supposed to last? In fashion, they may argue just one season, and I would rather my shoes last longer than that. The iPhone, if you can see, I don't know if you can see, if you've got I've got an old iPhone, a 6, and it has its issues. We'll talk about that. Game consoles, if you're a gamer, an upgrade to a game might make your console obsolete. Light bulbs. You may think of textbooks as, in the case of a engineering textbook where it's the design of concrete or the design of steel, and ACI or AISC has a standard change, well, hey, I think that's obsolescence. But planned obsolescence is when there's just some very minor changes made, and it's a new addition. Hosiery, pantyhose, personal media entertainment devices, all kinds of things. We'll talk a little bit about ink cartridges, mixers, where obsolescence went over the line into that planned obsolescence territory. And HDTV. So tube TV versus flat screen TV. So a lot of new technology. This was a fabulous 34-inch cathode ray tube TV. It weighed about 200 pounds. Beautiful piece of equipment, 34-inch. That was a big TV back in the day, around 2000. And with new technology, all of a sudden you had flat screen. Weight went down, cost went down. You can have a really big TV hang on your wall without fear of having to put in new studs to support the weight, because there was changes in technology. Obsolete. Telephones, the rotary to the flip to the smart, just obsolescence. And some people might think, flip, is that obsolete? Semi-obsolete. It depends on what you use your phone for now, huh? If you're just making phone calls with a phone, maybe the flip is just fine, not obsolete for you. Film, digital camera. So here's your film. We went to a digital, and now we can use our phones, not for phone calls, and get quality photos. So technology has changed. Things have become obsolete. So we have progress that occurs. We have technology that marches on. We have things that just, there's innovation, just new things that just become game changers, such as that difference between a landline and wireless telephone, that smartphone. Simply cultural or social preferences can make things obsolete. What you liked 10 years ago, not what you like today, not what you would buy today. Things change. So when do things change to where they really shouldn't have changed? So there are people that actually study planned obsolescence. There's depending on who you talk to, there's textbooks in business. So I pulled some information from a couple of those, and so you can lump planned obsolescence into 4 different categories. Some textbooks talk about more, some less. So we'll look at the 4. Contrived durability. So that's where you're either using, as the designer, fabricator, manufacturer, cheap materials in just a crucial area of wear, or you're laying out components in such a way as it's not optimal for the long-term health of the product. Say you have some part that heats up and you really could add a little bit of space between that heated component and other components that would extend a product's life, but you choose not to because you say, we can have that next model out sooner. Software updates. So if you have a product that requires an update in software and that user has purchased that product relatively recently, but you've got a new product out, and you, as the as the provider, decide that you're just not going to update the software to that product. And so here it's how relatively recently makes that planned obsolescence versus obsolescence. Perceived obsolescence. So this is where the old item is just perfectly fine, but the new model looks slicker, or comes in a really fabulous color or different finish, or has some other extra minor function that really does not impact the functionality of the product, but you as the consumer want the new one, not the old one. And so that's perceived obsolescence. The item is actually perfectly 100% functional, but because of some other minor feature, and it might just be the fact that it's the most recent model, that yields in your mind that the older model is obsolete. And then prevention of repair. So if you can't access the innards of something, so that if it's failed, but you have a good idea of why it's not working, but you can't access the location of that failed part or piece or connection, because the manufacturer has not made it accessible, or if the manufacturer has made replacement parts extremely expensive or hard to get, or you have to order them and it's a long lead time, all of a sudden that product can become obsolete in the eyes of the owner or user, even though if it is repaired, the product would be just fine. So there's a history of planned obsolescence, and it all started back around the Great Depression. So the United States went into a Great Depression after the wonderful rip-roaring 20s. The 30s were not so good. We didn't have the safety nets, the social safety nets that we have in place today. And a lot of people were out of jobs, banks closed, and people went hungry, lots of people. So there were some folks, business people, that had some ideas about how we can get the country out of depression. And a businessman named Bernard London in 1932 wrote an essay called The End of Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. And so Mr. London said, well, if we can cause the production of goods to be greater than the demand for goods, we could get us out of depression. But back in the 30s, things were built to last. We weren't even using plastics. So London recommended that there were some things that could be done in order to stimulate that demand side. I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing for the production of goods. I should have had it flipped the other way. So London said, if goods are what we call useless or unused, they should be destroyed. And in order to replace them, that would reactivate all those factories that are now shuttered. Furthermore, we should look at manufactured products and assign them a planned useful life. Consumers should know what that planned useful life is. And once that magic planned useful life period has been completed, the product then is deemed useless by law and destroyed. And people would receive financial compensation to replace this product. And finally, London said, in order to produce new goods to replace these unused or now useless ones, we can maintain industries and keep people from being unemployed. So interesting concept, but not embraced by the US government. So right around that time, Um, in the 20s, women wore silk stockings, and silk stockings were, one, expensive, and two, not very durable. And in 1935, nylon came about, and so stockings were then made of nylon. Um, and at the time, that nylon fabric that was used to make the stockings could last for years. It was really, really durable. But that meant that you wouldn't be selling a lot of stockings. And women were used to being very careful with their silk stockings, but replacing silk stockings more regularly than these fantastic, really strong nylon stockings. So the nylon stocking material was amended and made more so the stockings were rendered more fragile, and women had to buy stockings more often. So planned obsolescence. The light bulb. So here you see Thomas Edison. His first light bulb lasted, it was a wonderful thing, but it lasted 14.5 hours. Improvements were made. So increased life of light bulbs got to 2,000 hours, 2,500 hours. But in 1925, which was fairly early in the use of the light bulb to light our communities, something called the Phobos Cartel, and it was a group of the world's major light bulb manufacturers, decided that instead of that 2,500 hour life, the standard would be 1,000 hours. This was not necessarily a standard set to benefit society, but it was a standard set to render light bulbs as a more consumable product, and by use of a less durable filament. And so you had to replace your old light bulbs because they broke and no longer provided light, and it was a more consumable type of product. Perishable food. So here is it's usually in the textbooks yogurt, but I went into my refrigerator. So these are photos of yogurt and sour cream. One sour cream says best by September 13th. Another manufacturer sour cream says use by June 9th. And another one simply has a date stamp. It doesn't say used by, and it doesn't say best by. And so in Spain, by law, yogurt containers have to have a preferred consumption date and not an expiration date. So often in canned goods or in goods that might be, in your refrigerator, you think they're more perishable, but some of those products are not as perishable as others. Sour cream and yogurt fall into that category. And Spain would say that these should all have a preferred consumption date or a best by date, and not just a date or a use by date. Obsolescence, planned obsolescence. So you notice this was, I still had this in the fridge and it was beyond June 9th and I'm still using that sour cream, it's fine. Now, if this used by September 13th sour cream, I opened it up and it had the green fuzzies, it would get pitched. So I often use my eyes and my nose and my taste to guide me in this type of food, perishable food, to see if it's good or not, because I do know that these do last beyond these best by or used by or just plain old date indicators. Game consoles, I talked about that a little bit. So most games are not backwards compatible. So you can't use old games on the new consoles, and you can't use new games on the old consoles. It's a lot of plastics in the landfill, isn't it? The Apple iPhone. So these screws with every different issue of the apple got thinner. So this might be a 5 or a 6. The screws got smaller. They're an interesting screw in that Apple bought a whole bunch of them. You can buy the special screwdriver, and you might need a new screwdriver for your next Apple iPhone if you are an Apple user. But the whole reason behind this was Apple had made decisions in its iOS software updates that would slow down older phones based on battery performance. So average battery performance, it diminishes with time and causes increased shutdowns, which causes consumers to be unhappy with their iPhones. So Apple decided, well, hey, we'll just slow those old phones down so that the performance of the phone and the performance of the battery match, and we won't have those increased shutdowns. Well, users notice that their phones are slowed down. If you want to change your battery out, again, you've got to get that special screwdriver. You might invalidate your warranty. The replacement battery is expensive. You might have to visit your Apple store, which Apple limits the number of stores. And it's interesting that you need to make an appointment often to see someone at the Apple store, depending on the time of year. And it might not be Christmas. And your software is still going to slow down. So Apple has several countries actually some class action suits along these lines, and this is not their only issue with some of their products from the planned obsolescence point of view. Ink cartridges and printers. So for printers, some printers manufacturers will, after a certain number of pages that have been printed, there'll be a service alert. And so that service alert either needs a special code for a reset to happen, or needs to have a service, or you need to bring it to a service center. And you may or may not have any issue whatsoever. In fact, you probably don't have an issue with the printer. The service alert is all about well, from the point of view of the manufacturer, after that many copies, typically the quality of the printing of the printed page has been compromised, and so you need to have this service call. But they don't know your particular usage of that particular printer. So having that service alert after an arbitrary set number of pages reached is an example of planned obsolescence. Ink cartridges. So they often can cost more than the printer. And some have smart chips that disable the ink cartridge when the ink level is low. So just how low is low? So you're replacing a cartridge that still has ink in it. And that is, again, all about maintaining quality control of the printed page. But who is setting that standard? Nowadays you can adjust the quality of your print. So if you're printing drafts, having a low quality print might be just fine, and you can eke out the last of the ink in your cartridge, but not if there's a smart chip involved. So planned obsolescence. So mandated planned obsolescence. We saw a picture of that with that HD TV earlier. So in June of 2009, because broadcasting could be more efficient and people wanted HD, so the viewer was demanding this, we switched over to digital TV. So I don't know how many TVs became obsolete overnight. Same thing, but not quite as drastic. When Philips released the first LED light bulb with a lifespan of 20 years, that consumable light bulb, incandescent light bulb, came under fire. Um, the LED light bulb has a longer life and is more energy efficient. So depending on what your values are, and in particular, and if you value energy efficiency, the LED light bulb is the way to go. So are we going into a mandated planned obsolescence? One of the nice things about the LED light bulb is you can screw that you can buy them so that they screw into your receptacle of the incandescent light bulb size. So you're not going to have other products become obsolete because you can no longer get an incandescent light bulb. And I have a note here. I didn't realize this. I came across this in doing my research for this presentation, but there is a light bulb in Livermore, California called the Centennial Light. It's an incandescent bulb that was manufactured in around 1900. It's still shining today. It was interrupted only for 20 minutes 1 year, a couple of decades ago for, I'm not quite sure if they were changing out the outlet, but it was not due to the light bulb. So it's been, what, 120 years? Whoa. So you can build these things to last. But how much energy does that old light bulb emit? I mean, how much light does it emit per use of electricity? How efficient is it? Probably not very. So you can see often there are very gray areas between the obsolescence and the planned obsolescence side of things. Pros, good for the economy, good for society because it increases employment opportunities, because businesses grow bigger, good for individuals because it satisfies that psychological need to have stuff. Cons, bad for the environment because it wastes natural resources, increases poor air and water quality, greater use of energy for building these things over and over again with just slight changes. Bad for society because it actually accelerates social inequities because companies move to produce in undeveloped countries where labor is cheap and environmental regulation lacks. Bad for sustainability, bad for future generations. Under bad for individuals, I read somewhere, well, it renders repairmen obsolete. They become obsolete too. And it drives people to get the newest and the best and the greatest because often there is an associated commercialism and the use of psychology in driving the consumer to buy the next model. And if the consumer doesn't have the ability to pay cash, well, then you use credit and there are financial consequences. So is it illegal in the United States? No. Although Portugal's got a private consumer organization that has filed the latest Apple lawsuit over planned obsolescence. The people in France have sued Brother, HP, Epson, and Canon, those printers. So there's some things, and these are planned obsolescence lawsuits. What about some other laws? So the European Economic and Social Committee wants manufacturers to offer replacement parts and wants an estimated lifetime of a product indicated so consumers can make a decision based on some facts. Again, no American laws prohibit planned obsolescence, but we do have a Consumer Product Safety Commission that can, if it chooses to, issue durability standards. And it did so in 2012 when, in the case of 2 infant deaths in regard to cribs. So alternate law. So we may have some better oomph in laws that are not really directly involving planned obsolescence. But in Sweden in 2016, they decided to reduce the VAT, which is their tax, from 25% to 12% on any repair. So it's less costly tax-wise to repair equipment. They hope that things will have a longer life because of that. Well, that people will choose to use things more, repair them more often instead of just buying something new and throwing it into the trash. Italy guarantees 2 lives of service for any computer. So there are movements to maybe not have planned obsolescence become illegal, because it is really hard to say when is it just obsolescence versus planned obsolescence, but to get after it in other ways. And we do have environmental concerns. We've got some of our reserves of copper, lead, nickel, and other metals being depleted. The United Nations estimates that there are 50 million tons of e-waste each year, and most of that ends up in developing countries. And because developing countries are those that have the least capacity to properly recycle or properly deal with them, they pose a threat to the people living there and the environment of that country. So what can you do? So again, from the point of view of civil engineering, it's not us, it's them, those electricals, those mechanicals. Advocate for sustainable practices and practice what you preach. Remember, we talked about the code of ethics, and it talked about members create safe, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure. We consider current and anticipated needs of society, which anticipated needs indicates needs do change. So again, what is it, planned obsolescence or just plain old obsolescence? So consider in your decisions the use of resources that minimize resource depletion, things of that nature. I think we'll get to the point where ultimately we'll be digging in our old landfills and actually mining some of the things out of our landfills, because here we're talking now more into the civil engineering arena. Did you know that demolition and construction waste make up about 60% of our landfill waste? So we should advocate for recycling, reuse, and why are we demolishing in the first place? Maybe reuse of that infrastructure. Should we mine our landfills for these rare metals? Use innovative materials, but first consider their durability. Asset management, so use assets wisely, and emphasize proper maintenance so that you're not tearing down things just because they've been improperly maintained. And also communicate to decision makers and stakeholders, what are those costs? What are those benefits associated with value engineering? So my acknowledgements. And I'm 1 minute over. I do apologize. So I don't know if we have any time for questions, but it's time.
Thank you, Norma Jean. There's one question. When we design roadways for a specific lifetime, is that planned obsolescence? How do we decide what the lifetime is?
And that's a good question. And I have I'm going to answer that question with a question. So we've recently increased the life that we design bridges for. It used to be about 50, now we're moving to 75, are we going to push 100? So, and this is why planned obsolescence and obsolescence, there's this gray area. So if you build something for a longer life, it's going to, if you build something that has a 40-year life, at 20-year life, at its 20-year life, it's what, 50% used up? So if you build the same thing for a 75-year life, the half-life is 37 and a half. So you're going to have infrastructure that lasts longer, maybe, but the needs of society changes. So in the area of roadways and bridges, if we increase the life for that type of infrastructure to 75 to 100 years, and we all know that UPS and FedEx and Amazon and Google are working hard on driverless cars, but then the next thing is drones. How to get that big heavy thing that you purchased, not using a guy that's driving a brown truck with gold letters, or a brown, what is it, a black truck with a little blue smile, but a drone. Once we've got a drone that can safely carry something that weighs about 200, 250 pounds to your doorstep, the next step is you are going to be carried to your doorstep by a drone. And we're not going to be using roads the same way or bridges in the same way. So if we're looking at 100 years out, are we looking at the future and how innovation is going to change how we use these pieces of infrastructure? And when you're looking at a far off life, you get 50, 75, 100 years, and you make these assumptions, and you paint a picture of that future. The only thing you know for sure about that future is the future you've painted is wrong. It's going to be something like that, but it's not going to be we don't know, but what you have painted is going to be wrong, more than likely. So as we increase the life of our infrastructure, we really have to be careful. And so that's a really good question. Are we designing our roads for planned obsolescence, when the usage of our roads, the amount of traveling of traffic that we estimated, we know that the estimates, the further out we go with the life, the more likely our estimates are wrong. So it's, again, where's that line? It's not a line that you could write in ink between obsolescence and planned obsolescence.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things in everything we do is to have a good plan for the maintenance and operation of them, so that the life that was expected can be achieved and actually extended, possibly. We have one more comment, and then we'll wrap up here. It says, a very interesting and helpful presentation, positively thought-provoking. What I think is to intentionally think of the balance in our dealing with planned obsolescence. Thank you, Norma.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Before we do so, I just have a few technical instructions to share, and I will type these into the chat box when I'm done. If you are having technical problems, you can either visit Zoom support at support.zoom.us, or you can email the Texas section. Our email is office@texasce.org, and we'll be happy to assist you.